Two graves of the travellers, members of the travelling community. And I've been told by members of the travelling community that there's a superstition, a fear within their community that nobody should ever walk on your grave. Right? And in order, partly, they make sure that nobody ever does walk on your grave, even the people that are cutting the grass. As you can see, look, there's so many memoriams now, so it's nearly impossible for anybody to, walk on your grave either accidentally or thing. As far as I know, the city centre was opened in 1853, which would be 6 years after the famine. And it seems it was as a consequence of the Industrial Revolution, people moving from the countryside into cities, and then no longer were the wee small churches like at St Colum's, at the Long Tower, at St Colum's Cathedral, places like that couldn't cope with the amount of burials. So I think the city authorities then decided this land, poor land, wasn't great farming land. The outskirts of the city was designated as for the city cemetery. We want to come back to it, but you see just down here, see about that tree is there? That's where the Protestant burials would have stopped, in the 1960s. So when you go down there, you walk along and you see the Protestant burials from about 1968, 1969, even a few from 1970. And then after that, it sort of stopped then, and then it's become totally Catholic burials from up here. And when I take tours around the walls, just last year I was standing in the walls and we were looking up at the cemetery, and I was telling Americans about the history of the city. And one American says, he says, that cemetery looks strange, and I says, why? And he says, the top half looks really packed and the bottom half's empty. And I never noticed that before, and then I realised that's because the bottom half was probably the Protestant half, and Protestant burials stopped around about late 1960s, 1970, and the new cemetery opened over in Ballyowen, and
Gavin was real.
And even just now, occasionally you would get an odd burial from Presbyterian Church Ireland. Down here, people going on the old family graves, but on the main now, the cemetery would be nearly from what's known as the Catholic community, nationalist community. For it being a city, everybody remarks how beautiful a view there is on this here. If you go to Belfast, Milltown, and the city cemeteries in Dublin and all that, they're lying flat, you can see nothing, and they're sort of. But here you have this beautiful view out over the Foyle and up towards County Tyrone and down towards McGilligan Head. And Willie Foster from Derry at the Battle of Guillemont and Ginchy in the Somme. He was a piper, and he was piping the men in the battle in the Somme, the Derry men, the National Volunteers. And he was playing a nation once again, and he got wounded, and he was wounded 3 times, and there was shrapnel all over him. And he got up and played, and an officer from another gave him a wee flask. It was full of cold tea, and he drunk that, and it got his wound back for playing the pipes, and he continued to play them in. And he had 56, 60 operations the rest of his life, and he didn't die until 1988, when he was in his 90s. And the shrapnel from the Somme is still there with him because it was too dangerous to take it out of his body. So I think it's sad that he hasn't even got a proper headstone. Look. He's just got a wee sort of like a wee family homemade. I think we should rectify it and everything. But so up here and amongst that there, you've got a First World War veteran, 1988. So it brings the history of the world right here, up under the modern part of the city cemetery. This is a Republican Socialist monument in the city cemetery. Patsy O'Hara and Maggie Devine, 2 of the hunger strikers, are buried here, and it's one of the most visited plots in the cemetery. And it's not without controversy either, because unionists and that were upset that they saw this was a glorification of violence and that, but it's a very special place to people, Irish Republicans and Irish Republican Socialists. I remember whenever they were actually putting this up, I think the crane nearly collapsed off the back of the lorry there. It was so heavy here this year, but you can see they went to a bit of effort here to commemorate all the Republican dead, and it obviously looks quite expensive, so they regard it as a fine tribute to them. It's my mother's and father's grave there. We would visit it nearly every week, every second week there. Special, just shows it's our cemetery, it's ours, it's where our people, you see your sense of belonging and who you are and what you are is where your family's buried, and is where our family is, my mother and father. We're not far from my mother and father. Here's another very tragic event in Irish history. The victim of Stardust disaster here, this wee girl here there, 1981, she was only aged 19. I was 17 in 1981, around about the same age they were killed. There was a big fire in Dublin. It was a converted warehouse factory, and they turned it into a disco, and somebody started a fire on Valentine's night. All the young people, all dressed in their prime, all out looking for girlfriends, boyfriends. I mean, I can relate to it, I was that age. And a fire started, they all headed the exit, and the exits were chained up and locked. 49 of them died, and then as usual people started to blame the young people for starting the fire, and that, you know, blame the victims, blame the victims, put the blame on them, and it wasn't. All the fire escapes were all locked. They never stood a chance. Just left the Stardust where it was tragic. 49 young people died in the prime of their life. Now this is the Bloody Sunday graves here. I mean, I don't think anybody needs any introduction to Bloody Sunday, but the difference between the multiple deaths here and say the Stardust was, this was committed by the state, broad daylight in front of cameras. And these are all neighbours of mine here. The Nashes live behind us, and Dunree Gardens, and the Kellys live down below us, and Dunmore, and my own cousin was killed that day, Jackie Duddy. Somebody had the idea maybe they should bury them all together, but a lot of families requested that their loved ones should go into their family plot amongst, like, just say for my own cousin Jackie Duddy, he went into the family plot along with his mother as requested. 5 of them when we're here, and also one of the most visited sections of the city cemetery by tourists, locals, visitors alike. Very sombre part of it, very tragic reminder of the past, but it's very personal to the families, and everything. You've got the history of the world's in the cemetery. This part of the cemetery here would be the early 1970s, so if you see the number of flagpoles that represent the Republican dead and that, but the Troubles would be here 1971, 72, 70, just past the Bloody Sunday graves, which was on 30th of January 1972, and brings us here to Manus Derry, murdered by British troops 19th of May 1972, and Ranger Wooly Best, who lived just over here. Was home on leave from the army in Germany, and he was killed on the 21st of May. Now, Wooly Best and Manus Derry had been at school together in St Joseph's, my old school, and Wooly Best had went to the wake of Manus Derry on the 19th of May, and then William Wooly Best himself was killed on the 21st of May, and they're buried here side by side, and I think it reflects some of the complexities, the troubles here. Very sad, I think, too. We've come down here from then, and this is would be the provisional Republican plot. the volunteers, the IRA, Ogla and Iron, all the different battalions. And I think there's an organisation called the National Graves Association, actually care and tend for these graves and that. And this is where they would hold the Easter commemorations and all the major speeches that throughout the troubles and the conflict would have been made from here. It's a very revered and honoured place for Irish Republicans, and it's actually quite impressive. Like it's sort of more grandeur than say the British Legion, you know, for the World War graves. And I didn't knew all these people here. John Brady would have been in there too, down in Malin Garden. James Downey's buried here, 23 years of age, died in 1916 July. Easter Rising was in April, May, June, July. So 3 months after Easter Rising he died, and he actually was in France. So people see a wee grave here and they say he was in the Royal Irish Regiment and he was a soldier in the First World War. But there's a bigger story to that. James Downey was a very prominent member of the Irish Volunteers 1st Battalion. This is his postcard. And this is a picture of them on parade down where the Roswell Flats was, down in Roswell Street, the cattle market. This was their flag. And this is James here, his child, and the wee locket, and that's his wedding ring. And that's his widow in Fulton Place in the Bogside in the 1950s. And here's the postcard asking them to join the Irish Brigade, the Irish National Volunteers from the Derry Company, to go to St Colum's Hall in 1914 and join the Irish Brigade. So there's a huge story here, and one of his comrades here wrote the letter to his wife, sympathising on his death, and one of them wrote here was Wally Foster. Wally Foster died in 1988, lived a great old long life up here, and so rather than just being a British soldier that fought in the First World War, he was a patriotic Irishman, an Irish national volunteer that went off to fight for the rights of small nations, like so many. Remember, as they speak, that after the First World War, the Spanish flu wiped out far more people than was ever killed in the war. And I just read a newspaper report that in 1 week in this cemetery in 1919, with the Spanish flu, there were 50 people buried in the 1 week. Now you should remember that over the years, there's probably every year there's about 400 people buried on here. I think there's about 80,000 in total burials on here. But in 1 week, 50 people with a Spanish flu, and the following week there was 20. They had to bring in extra grave diggers from other places. I mean, that is a lot of people in the 1 week from a small town. But the Spanish flu in 1919, 1912 wiped out millions, 9-10 million people. These two graves side by side really show the complexities of Irish history. With Commander James McGlinchey here, founder and commander of the Irish National Volunteers in Derry in 1912-22, and buried beside him is Oglac James Keenan, IRA. He was very active 1919-20, 21 in Derry during the War of Independence and that. But both of them had served in the British Army. James Keenan, I think he was a World War I veteran. And then two ardent Republicans, nationalists, buried side by side. It's all the history of the words in here, the history of the city. These graves here, if you look here, this was killed at Skeog down at Bridge End there in the 1920s. It takes us right back to the Irish Civil War, the War of Independence. With the Gallaghers here, 21 years old, 1922, shot by Free State soldiers, Drumbo Castle, Irish Civil War. So as we move down the cemetery, we're moving down, and the history is moving back, the ways back to the Irish Civil War, the War of Independence. And the further down we go, the more historical it gets, the further back. It's in chronological order. The diversify away from the orange and green, Catholic, Protestant, world history, whatever, is that this man here is called Alderman Patrick McCairn. And if you can see here, he was drowned when the Germans sunk the SS Leinster during the First World War. Now, Alderman McCairn wasn't interested in Catholics, Protestants, orange, green, anything. He was interested in the workers, and he was on his way to London to negotiate wage rates for the shirt factory workers of Derry when he was killed. So he was a very strong Labour man, and this big fine monument was erected in his memory from his comrades in the trade union movement. He's not the only person that drowned in that. For over here we also will have another grave for Dean Cecil Francis Alexander, who wrote All Things Bright and Beautiful. Their son's buried beside him, and he was also drowned in it, and there's someone else also drowned in it. So this big sinking in the Irish Sea is brought historically back home to the cemetery in Derry. This here is a very sad part of the cemetery here. There are thousands of people buried here. They're the paupers. Right up until the 1940s when the workhouse closed over there, these are the people that had nobody belonging to them, had no money to bury themselves, and no headstones, nothing to commemorate, no flowers from families to come over. It's actually really sad, it's really sombre. You can see here the indentations of their graves, you can see, and there's thousands of them buried here that had nobody there, nothing. And they say that in cemeteries the world over that your headstone usually reflects the grandeur that you had in life and your status. And look, they have nothing. So they were the people that had nothing. A very sad thing. We're trying to get a project going to this cemetery because it really, well, every day that passes, every week that passes, there's headstones are collapsing. Look at this. And look at all the information and history that's going with it. And here, behind us, and here you can see, I mean, we've got to say, this is the Edwardian Victorian section of the cemetery. And down in Glasnevin in Dublin, they've it all recorded. They're fixing the headstones, they've got tours, they've got people are proud of it, and they've created employment for people too. And I think this should all be saved here, all this history. I mean, I think it's well sad, all that information on these tombstones are gone, unless we can do something now and fix them up and record the information. Alright, we're leaving here. Look, see up here now, this is all the Catholic section. And whenever we leave it now, we're going to the Protestant section, divided in death. But you will notice that the surnames will change from Bradley and Doherty and McLaughlin and that over to Cathcart and Colquhoun and etc. And yet the architecture will change also, and the wording on it will change then. From Trevor was pointing out to me here that the Catholic section here have always RIP. It's unusual to see RIP down here on the Protestant section. You'll see the architecture changing from Christian crosses. And similarly, when the Unionist people, the Protestant people come here, they find it surprising that down here you also have very ornate Celtic crosses, Irish round towers, and even some Gaelic script down here in the Protestant section. So nothing's as black and white as it seems. But this is the dividing line here, and once we move from here to here, we're moving from the Catholic section to the Protestant section. Notice the change in architecture. These Roman obelisks here. We've just come down the Catholic section. I have not seen one of them there still haven't seen one all the years I've been coming over here. But the minute we arrive in the Protestant section, look, there's one, two, there's one of the biggest of them there here all. So you can see the architecture changes.
This is the largest monument here in the city cemetery, and if you look, it has the name Patrick Gilmore, 1856, the year of his death. Now, Patrick Gilmore was actually born in Scotland in late 18th century, and his father came over here, became a successful merchant, and so did Patrick. And Patrick was a Presbyterian, and he was a great philanthropist. And at the times during the bad times here in the city, he would have used his money to alleviate the suffering of the poor. There was a cholera outbreak here in the city about 1832. It claimed a lot of lives, and Patrick Gilmore used his money then to, as I say, alleviate the suffering of the poor. And during the Great Famine of 1847, he did likewise. He also used his wealth to alleviate the suffering of the poor. Now he's associated with the fountain area in the city. He lived in a place called the Grove, which became Grove Place, and there was a nearby street. It's now called Hawkins Street, but for a time in the 19th century, the mid-19th century, it was known as Gilmore's Lane, and the Gilmore took its name from this man here, this great Presbyterian philanthropist, Patrick Gilmore. And this man, this is the, it says here, this is the grave of William Tully. William Tully created the shirt factory that became Tully and Henderson's around the late 1850s. It was situated at the bottom of Abercorn Road, Foyle Road, and then it was part of Wapping Lane, but that part of Wapping Lane became Tully's Brae. And now, it was the factory itself was burnt down around December 2002, I think. And during the First World War, the Tully family suffered quite a lot. Quite a number of the members of the family actually died during the Great War, and their names are commemorated on the War Memorial on the Diamond. And Tully's factory is actually Karl Marx's famous treatise Das Kapital. He actually names, the Tully's factory. When people talk about the shirt industry here was a flourishing industry for many years here in the city, and people talk about a man called William Scott as being the founder of the shirt industry. But William Scott's shirts were actually designed by hand. But when they talk about Tully, they talk about Tully mechanising. He became the first one to kind of mechanise the shirt industry here in the city. So you have William Scott, the founder of the shirt industry, but you have William Tully, who's buried here, actually mechanising that industry. So this is the grave of Cecil Frances Alexander, the world famous hymn writer. She was the wife of William Alexander, here says Bishop of Derry and Raphoe. So he would be the Anglican Bishop of Derry and Raphoe. He died on October the 12th, 1895. And they say he was a powerful preacher. And when he preached up in the cathedral, the cathedral would have been packed with people. They came across contemporary references where he said he was one of the most powerful preachers in the United Kingdom of his era. So Cecil Frances Alexander, she, as I say, she a world-renowned hymn writer. Once in Royal David City, there is a green hill far away where two of her most famous hymns. So she's actually buried here, and there's a kind of nice, kind of white plain cross here, marking her death. So very peaceful.
The War Memorial in the Diamond, there's 756 names, Catholics, Protestants, men that fought for Australian forces, Canadian forces, men were in the Navy, the Air Force. We've got one nurse, a woman called Laura Geely, and they're all commemorated. A lot of them's commemorated here, and if you want to do a pilgrimage to go to First World War or Second World War graves, you don't have to go to the Somme or to go to Gallipoli or whatever. In here, you have a lot of people who were injured, they were shipped home, and then they died of their injuries. And so there's people buried from both conflicts here. Second World War, you had a lot of naval people whose bodies were recovered at sea, were brought on here for burial. And as I said before, the whole history of the world, the history of conflict, the Republican, Unionist, the famine, social history, the lot is in here. It's a very special place. Fella does maintenance. One of the people was saying to me he enjoys actually coming to work here. He says it's like a book. I says it must be a beautiful book because you open it up and you've got this beautiful view and you've got all the history, sad history. But I don't know, but everybody I talk to always say that when they come to visit the cemetery, they find a bit of solace and comfort and peace and quiet and reflection in it. And everybody's equal, isn't it? Doesn't matter how much you had or how much money you had or whatever, we're all equal in death. And that's the end of it now, and hopefully we're going to see if we can get some funders. We can record all the information, record the history, the graves that are broke, fix them up, have a plan, because we are aware that overgrown graves and stained graves are part of the character of graveyards. But I think we should get to work, get some funding, get people working and record the history and heritage and history from headstones that we have in this great cemetery of ours, in this great historic city of ours, and create a shared space where everybody, Catholics, Protestants, visitors, locals, can come and pay their respects and be respectful to our dead and those that have gone before. Thanks very much.